This is Brevard Watch, the news experience focused exclusively on Florida's Space Coast. I'm Matt Reed. My thanks to Community Credit Union for sponsoring today's program. My guest in the studio today is State Representative Randy Fine. He represents Palm Bay, Southern Melbourne Beach, Malabar, Grant Valcaria, and I think parts of West Melbourne as well. Representative Fine, thanks for joining us in the BPS TV studio.
Happy to be here.
Let's talk about one of the biggest pieces of legislation that the legislature had to produce in a hurry that could have significant impact on Florida schools after the Parkland shooting, and that is the school safety bill. Not an easy choice, it sounds like, for our delegation members, including you. Walk us through that.
Well, from the time the Parkland shooting happened until the time we passed that bill was 3 weeks. A decision was made that we were going to act before we left session, since it happened while we were in session. And it ended up dominating the last month that we were there. The bill had a lot of good. It had a lot of things that people found challenging. I think if you asked any one of the people who voted for the bill, they would tell you they had some issues with things that are in it. But on any issue as complicated as school safety, you're never going to get agreement on everything. And this was a bipartisan product that was done in a very, very short period of time.
Tell me about the pluses and minuses for you personally as a lawmaker.
Sure. Well, the biggest plus for me was the notion that we will never again compel a teacher or to be a sitting duck in a school. We know definitively that gun-free zones don't work. In fact, gun control doesn't work. If it did, if they said this is a gun-free zone, no one would ever bring a gun there. 98% of mass shootings since 1950 have happened in gun-free zones. So this bill provides $67 million of funding to allow school personnel to be trained to carry a weapon so that these people will know that if they go into a school facility, they will not be unchallenged. But it also has hundreds of millions of dollars for mental health, additional police officers in schools, the hardening of schools. And it makes it easier for us to take weapons away from those that are deemed to be mentally ill, which I think is important as well.
That was one of the things in this bill that didn't get a lot of coverage. It got described as a gun bill a lot, but there was something in there called a red flag law. Mm-hmm. In other words, it allows you to get some kind of an order that if you have a scary person like they had in Parkland and you can identify who those people are, you can take steps.
That's
What's
right.
your understanding of that?
Well, you know, our rights can't be taken away with that due process of law. But that doesn't mean if you don't follow laws that you can't take steps. And in the case of the Nicholas Cruz in Parkland, police would be able to go to a court, present evidence that says, look, he's not mentally well. He should not be able to be in possession of weapons. If the judge agrees, the police can go and take the weapons away. They can't keep them forever. When the person in general proves that he is mentally fit, they get their weapons back. But this would allow those who are not mentally stable to not have weapons that they could use to hurt themselves or others.
Presumably that information would go into the background check system. The system would flag so they couldn't buy it. And in the meantime, if they wanted to go get their weapons back and have their full rights restored, they would have to probably do something like go get counseling, get a mental evaluation.
And then go back to the judge.
And then
That's right.
Go back to the judge. There were gun provisions in this bill, though. I believe that there was the outlawed bump stocks. Mm-hmm. That was one that got a lot of buzz. Raised the age for buying a firearm from 18 to 21.
Not exactly.
No? Okay. Well, and there was one other, but I can't remember exactly what that was at the moment. But what did you make of those?
Well, in a 105-page bill, there were 2 pages related to gun issues. And to walk through them briefly, one would have made any aftermarket product that increases the rate of fire of a gun illegal effective October 1st.
Okay.
So if the gun shoots fast, that's fine, but no product that increases the rate of firing. The second thing the bill does is it eliminates one channel that people 18 to 20 can use to purchase guns. They could no longer go in to a federal firearms dealer and purchase a gun unaccompanied. Okay. If a parent wanted to buy them a weapon or if they bought it in a private transaction, it's not against the law. Possession of a weapon from 18 to 20 is not against the law. And then the third thing that the bill did is it extended a minimum 3-day waiting period for all firearms in the state of Florida, unless you're in the military, law enforcement, or you have a hunting license. Then you can get a gun immediately. But for those people who aren't already hunters, and this only affects long rifles, there are already laws on the books related to handguns.
So this doesn't sound like something that takes away guns or is a serious infringement on Second Amendment rights, but it's always hard to tell in a political context, how people are going to take that. I mean, did it seem like a particularly aggressive set of gun provisions to you, or things that you could say, okay, those are common sense, and probably my constituents agree with those?
Well, I didn't think they infringed on the Second Amendment right at all. The Second Amendment says you have the right to keep and bear arms. As a constitutionalist, I believe the framers meant what they wrote. It says keep and bear, which means use. None of those three provisions affect those. And so while, frankly, personally, I wish they hadn't been in the bill, because I don't think they had anything to do with what happened in Parkland, and I don't think they will stop anything in the future. When I had to decide whether I push a green button to vote for it or a red button to vote against it, I thought, look, this isn't enough to get me to vote against it. There were certain things that were discussed that had they been in the bill, I would not have been able to vote for it. But those three things, again, changing the rate of fire, saying you have to buy a gun from one channel but not another, and saying that you have to wait 3 days unless you're already a hunter, those things I could live with.
A week before Parkland, Brevard Public Schools gathered its student government presidents who had requested, they wanted somehow to get to the legislature and see if they could get some support for mental health services. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, that made it into the bill.
It did.
But it was interesting to see students themselves there talking about what they see on their campuses. I know you took time to meet with them. What did you make of that?
Well, look, I think this is the big untold story of the Parkland shooting, which is there's something going on. We've had high school kids for hundreds of years. Why is it today? I'm not saying we don't need more mental health counseling. Clearly we do, which is why we voted for it. But why? What is going on? And to some degree, increasing mental health counseling in schools because of an increase in mental health counseling is equivalent to saying we have a headache crisis going on in schools, so let's put out more Tylenol. Why are kids getting into the situation? Where I went to school, when I was growing up, people had their rifles hanging on their gun racks in their trucks, but nobody ever had the idea to go out and grab it and start shooting people. Something has happened in our culture that we need to get behind. So we need to address the problems with increased mental health counseling, but we need to figure out what is it that's happening that is making so many of our kids need this mental health counseling. I don't have the answer for that. I have theories, but I think we've got to figure that out.
When we come back, there's legislation that has passed that would help potentially clean up the Indian River Lagoon, or at least make some money available for it. The lawmaker behind that idea talks to us and explains how.
At Community Credit Union, we are always looking for ways, big and small, to make your life better. Manage your accounts online, anytime, anywhere, with eBranch Online and mobile services. Use your mobile device to check your balance, make a deposit, pay bills, apply for a loan, and more. It doesn't get any more convenient than this. Search for the CCU mobile app on your device and download it for free. At CCU, bringing you better options matters. Find out more by visiting ccuflorida.org.
I'm Matt Reed. This is Brevard Watch. My thanks to Community Credit Union for sponsoring today's program. My guest in the studio today is Representative Randy Fine. He represents much of South Brevard, including Palm Bay, a lot of West Melbourne, Grant Valcaria, Malabar, and the southern Melbourne beaches. Representative Fine, thanks again for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Let's shift gears and talk about the Indian River Lagoon.
Okay.
Let's go back to last October. You were, it seemed, ticked off and wrote a letter to county commissioners criticizing them for spending, I think, more than $14 million on some other tourism-related projects, but not on cleaning up the lagoon, which was suffering from the aftermath of the hurricane. Explain.
Well, when the hurricane came, we had a release of raw sewage into the Indian River Lagoon. And then the hurricane stopped, and we had a release of raw sewage into the Indian River Lagoon. And it continued and it continued and it continued. For 37 consecutive days, the Brevard County Commission released raw sewage into the Indian River Lagoon. And my constituents were angry, and I was angry. And then I saw on the news that literally while they were releasing sewage into the lagoon, they voted to spend $200,000 to improve a kayak pier a quarter mile away from where they were releasing the sewage. They didn't think they needed to spend money to fix the sewage release. They thought it was a good idea to spend money so people could tour it on their kayaks. And then I learned they were spending $5 million on AstroTurf. They wanted to spend $7 million to build a basketball arena that we don't need. They wanted to spend $500,000 to build a museum to memorialize people who work in lighthouses. Not lighthouses themselves, people who work in lighthouses. And they wanted to spend $1.7 million to build an RV park. You know, if an RV park is a good idea, let a private businessman build it. The government doesn't need to. And I said, this is crazy. The lagoon is dying, and you're going to spend $14.5 million on these white elephant boondoggles, and it's just not right. And that's when I went to work to fix the issue.
Was there something about the pot of money? I mean, we just voted on a tax for lagoon projects. Did they think that the money was going to come from that, or what was your understanding of?
Sure.
What is the justification for one type of spending versus another?
Sure. Well, when they advocated the half-cent sales tax, they said it's not enough money. They said it is no more than 50% of the money that is necessary to solve the problem. So the half-cent sales tax will raise about $400 million over 10 years. By their own estimates, when they passed the half-cent sales tax, they needed more than $800 million, or actually more than $1 billion to solve the problem. Because the way they sold it was Brevard County will put in $1, the state will put in $1, and then the federal government will put in $1. Problem was they didn't line up the matching funds before they got the tax raised. So we have a half-cent sales tax, but it's not enough money. And so we need to find other sources of funds to fix the problem. This is a multi-billion-dollar problem. We have $400 million lined up. Do you know how you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And so this is a source of in addition to $40 million a year, we've now identified $13 million a year that they can spend on this problem. The lagoon is a $696 million a year tourism asset to Brevard County.
That was one of the biggest reasons why
That's
it
right.
seemed like there was amazing consensus politically, from business people, culturally, for cleaning up this waterway. It is tourism. In some contexts, it might make perfect sense to spend money on a rowing dock for people that come to Brevard County to row and enjoy the lagoon. But what you're saying is, hold on, don't do that yet until you take care of the water quality issue.
I have constituents telling me that they're throwing away their paddleboards. They're getting rid of their kayaks. They're no longer willing to fish in the lagoon. They're no longer willing to swim in the lagoon. We need to fix the lagoon before we start spending more money on ways for people to get into it. Look, in the private sector where I come from, you prioritize. You make a list of things you have to do, and you don't work on number 2 until you get number 1 finished. For some reason, these politicians don't seem to understand that, and they'd rather spend $5 million on fake grass than $5 million on actual seagrass that we have in the lagoon, and that's just not acceptable.
What has happened since October?
Sure.
I know there's been some kinds of action, and you've had some things to say publicly about it. Has there been results?
Well, we were able to get a bill passed that frees up $13 million a year that could be spent on other things, silly things like billboards that say Shop Vieira or Visit Palm Bay, but don't even tell you where they are, or these kinds of projects that I mentioned. Now that $13 million can join the $40 million from the half-cent sales tax to increase the amount of money that is available for the Indian River Lagoon. Now it's up to the county commission to decide they want to spend that money in that way, but we've now brought them $50 million more over the next 5 years that they can use to improve the Indian River Lagoon.
Obviously, there are competing interests when it comes to that,
Sure.
that money. I don't think a lot of voters who vote mainly on their property tax issues and sales tax issues know that that nickel that gets charged per dollar on a hotel room is broken down by statute where every last penny goes. Who are the competing interests here for money, for example, that could be used for cleaning the lagoon?
Sure. Well, there's about 15 things the money could be spent on before my legislation. It could be spent to put sand on the beach. It could be spent to build a convention center, which we don't actually have. It can be spent on marketing. It can be spent on zoos. Part of the funding for the Brevard Zoo comes from taxes. It could be spent on an aquarium, which we don't have. It can be spent on sports stadiums. That's, I think, how the Space Coast Stadium was partially funded. They've got about 15 things they can spend the money on. They can spend the money to clean up inland lakes and waterways. Unfortunately, the politicians in Brevard County tried to argue that a lagoon was not an inland lake or waterway. So we went and fixed that in the bill. So there's a lot of things they can spend the money on, but this lets them spend it on this if they so choose.
You talked about matching fund money.
Sure.
Are you in a position, or are other lawmakers in a position, where if they just don't like what the Brevard County spent its money on, or they has this problem with the thing, that it's just going to be less likely to match dollars?
That happened. I
Okay.
mean, there was a bill, it wasn't my bill, I was a co-sponsor on it, to try to provide a $50 million match a
Okay.
year. The problem is if the politicians knew what they were doing, they would have put the half-cent sales tax on the ballot to say, this goes into effect the day the state matches the money. And then we could have gone and say, hey, we have this money ready to go if you match it. The problem is they put up the money before the state agreed to match it. The problem was convincing the state that Brevard County needs money when they have money for AstroTurf, museums for lighthouse employees, kayak piers where you're going to paddle through sewage, basketball arenas and RV parks. It's a hard sale to make. And that's why that bill did not even get heard by a single committee.
Who was the co-sponsor on that?
The main sponsor of the bill in the Senate was Senator Mayfield.
Okay.
The main sponsor of the bill in the House was Representative Harrell, who also covers the Indian River Lagoon just a little bit further south. But I co-sponsored the bill. Representative Placencia was the prime co-sponsor on the bill. I think Representative Altman co-sponsored the bill as well. I don't remember whether Representative Goodson did as well. So we all co-sponsored it, but the bill didn't even get a hearing in the House.
The reason I ask is that it was only about a couple of years ago that Florida Today did a report card on its state delegation and gave everybody straight Fs based on their outlook on legislation for the lagoon. Does it seem to you like things have changed?
Well, I'd like to think I wouldn't get an F. I mean, I've actually created the first new funding source for the lagoon in many years from the state by getting this law passed. I don't know. I mean, look, I would give the lagoon an F. I mean, we've had a year and a half since this sales tax went into effect, and it doesn't look like it's getting any better. So the problem is, are we spending the money the right way? And I think that's a concern that a lot of people have. One other point I'd make, though, is what people don't realize is the half-cent sales tax resulted in cuts to lagoon spending. There's almost a statement from the politicians that if it weren't for the half-cent sales tax, they have no obligation to spend general revenue on the lagoon. So whatever money used to be spent from general revenue on lagoon restoration, that's gone away. Now it's just the half-cent sales tax. Let's say they were spending $10 million out of general revenue in the past. They're now saying, no, we have the lagoon sales tax. They should still be spending that money today, but I think they've cut it to go spend it on other silly projects.
Well, when we come back, some lessons on state government from a businessman turned state legislator.
At Community Credit Union, we are always looking for ways, big and small, to make your life better. Manage your accounts online, anytime, anywhere, with eBranch Online and mobile services. Use your mobile device to check your balance, make a deposit, pay bills, apply for a loan, and more. It doesn't get any more convenient than this. Search for the CCU mobile app on your device and download it for free. At CCU, bringing you better options matters. Find out more by visiting ccuflorida.org.
I'm Matt Reed. Thanks for joining us. My thanks to Community Credit Union for sponsoring today's program, and my thanks to Representative Randy Fine for joining us here in the BPS TV studio. Representative, let's talk about what you've learned in Tallahassee. I mean, business people get fired up and run for office a lot. What have you learned since you've learned a lot, obviously, but what are some of the biggest differences between serving in the legislature and kind of what you thought things might be like?
Well, I think I talked about this issue before, the notion of prioritization and the difficulty that politicians seem to have in focusing on what's important versus what's not important. That's something I learned a lot about. I think a second thing I've learned about is the number of politicians who don't do this for the betterment of their constituents, but do this for the betterment of themselves.
Really?
I mean, the level of corruption that is out there. I'm not necessarily saying in Tallahassee. I did not run on local corruption, but like I think 40% of the cities in Brevard County are now under investigation for one thing or another since I got there. Whether it's the audit I asked for in Palm Bay, or the CRA abuse that we uncovered in Palm Shores, or the investigations going on in Melbourne and West Melbourne about embezzlement. I mean, what I've learned is there are a lot of people who serve in these jobs because they believe it is good for them, not because it is good for their constituents. This is the worst financial decision I've ever made in my life, and it keeps me away from my wife and kids. But I'm doing it because I want to provide them with a better future, and everyone like them. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people who don't have those same interests.
How much do you get paid as a state representative?
You get $29,000 a year to be a state representative.
So what's in it? What's in it for a politician who runs for state office? I mean,
Sure. Well, for me, I didn't like what the future looked like for Jacob and David, my two sons, and I didn't have a good excuse not to go do something about it. And so 20 years from now, when Jacob and David are older, they can look at me and I can tell them, hopefully, that I served. I was away for you for some number of years, and as a result, these good things have happened. That's what's in it for me. I want to show my boys that if they have the opportunity to give something back, that they will do it. That's what's in it for me.
I want to get your take on something that I hear all the time.
Okay.
Not from state legislators, but I hear it as a person who works for the school district. You hear it from teachers sometimes. You hear it from activists in the community, and it's that, schools need more money, and the reason they don't get more money is that you're not going and shaming your state lawmakers enough and haranguing them or holding their feet to the fire. What do you make of that?
Well, I think some of these people would never say you had enough money, no matter how much you got. I mean, the 2 years that I've been in the legislature, our education budget has been the largest in the history of the state, and our per-student spending has been the largest in the history of the state. I think that to some degree it turns out how we spend the money. And there is no correlation, to be clear, between the amount of money that is spent and the results. You can look at places like Baltimore, where they spend 3 times the national average, and their results are atrocious. It is not so much how much money is spent, it is how it is being spent. And we've done a lot of work in the legislature to make sure that there's more transparency and visibility and a greater results orientation on how those dollars are spent.
Are there things that you see going right?
Absolutely. I mean,
what?
we've dramatically increased school choice in the state of Florida. I mean, you've got the ability to send your child to a traditional public school. You can send your child to a charter school. You can homeschool them. We now have Florida Virtual School, which is a public school. And we have a growing number of voucher programs for people with special needs. So if your child has issues that can't be addressed in the public school system, you can take them to a school that can. We've got more school choice options in Florida than anywhere else in the country.
One provision this year, it passed. I know you were skeptical of this early on. It was kind of a head scratch for a lot of people, was the Hope Scholarship. Mm-hmm. I don't have a position one way or another because I don't know how it's going to work. But if their child is bullied in school, or they're the victim of violence or sexual assault or something, they can transfer schools. That's easy enough. But if not that, they can also get a voucher to go to a private school, or they could go use that money to take transportation to go to a school in another school district. Mm-hmm. How did you come down on that one?
I ended up voting for it twice, I think. I'll tell you a story. I have a constituent in my district. It's a child who's in my Cub Scout pack that I'm very involved with, who had to leave the school that they go to because of intense bullying. And the parents are now having to teach that child at home because in the South Beaches, there aren't a lot of school options. There aren't charter schools. There aren't private schools. The population's there's just not that many people there. I believe they'll go and get the Hope Scholarship, and that's going to dramatically open up their ability to not only, they could use that money to get transportation to get to another public school if they so chose. What it does is it says if you are bullied, you are not forced to stay in the public school that is available to you. You can go to a different public school and get transportation there. You can go to a charter school, or you can go to a private school, or you can use the money to get homeschooled. But it is looking out for the needs of the child. I was someone who was terribly bullied. I talked about it on the House floor. And I think about how my life might have been a little bit different if my parents had had those choices. The good news is now parents will have those choices.
Do you think, from your perspective, in the legislation, is there enough of a threshold for investigation and confirming these cases? Because initially it sounded like you could just claim that you were being bullied, and the next thing you know, you're being handed a big check to go to a private school.
Well, there are some safeguards, but we would like to believe that parents are going to only use this, and the amount of money set aside is not unlimited. So there is a fixed amount of money that is available for these things. So it's not that much. So we're gonna, I think, see how it works, and then if the program needs to be tweaked, it can be tweaked. But for children who are trapped with parents who don't have choice. See, I had choice. My kids, I took them out of the school that they were at because I wasn't happy with what was going on there. But I had the ability to do that because I was blessed in my business career. I don't think only wealthy people should have school choice. I think everybody should.
You may be angling, or no, that's a terrible word, but you have been getting experience that would potentially lead you to be like an appropriations chairman sometime in the near future. Talk about that a little bit. Why would you do that?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm angling for anything, but in the Florida legislature, there are 8-year term limits. And so typically, as people become more senior, they move into the leadership roles because you don't know what you're doing when you're new. So I had a very good first session. In my second session, all 6 of my bills made it to the House floor. 4 of the 6 became law. All 6 of my appropriations requests made it into the budget. And so I believe that as I move through, assuming I'm reelected, to a second, third, and fourth term, I'll become a subcommittee chair, and then I'll be a full committee chair. And it's not so much angling; it's that you put the more senior people who actually have experience in those roles. I think I've been pretty effective for Brevard County in this first term, but I think that effectiveness will only increase. I was a pretty good student in school, and I've tried to learn how the process works as best I can, and I think I'll be able to become increasingly effective as I move up the ranks.
I want to ask you a question that we hear a lot. It had to do with the gun issue. Again, you hear it a lot. How powerful is the NRA in the Capitol? Does it live up to its mythology there?
If it has power, one interesting thing I wish people knew is the NRA has not given a single dollar to a candidate running for state office in Florida in 18 years. They didn't give me $1. And to be clear, there's no runaround. I didn't get $1 from people who make guns or make ammunition. There no gun contributions at all. So their power, if you would call it that, is there are millions of people in the state of Florida who are members of the NRA, and they vote and they care about these issues. The NRA itself has no power. It is their membership that has power. And I think they do have quite a bit because they're great Americans and they care about the issue. So they do. NRA doesn't have power. Their membership has power.
Well, thank you very much for this civics lessons today. And I want to thank you for joining us here on Brevard Watch. My thanks to Community Credit Union, again, for sponsoring today's program. My thanks to Randy Fine, representative from South Brevard, for taking time to come in here today and explain the issues to us. We'll see you right here next Sunday, on BPS TV, Spectrum Channel 496, and throughout the week on YouTube, #BrevardWatch.
At Community Credit Union, we are always looking for ways, big and small, to make your life better. Manage your accounts online, anytime, anywhere, with eBranch Online and mobile services. Use your mobile device to check your balance, make a deposit, pay bills, apply for a loan, and more. It doesn't get any more convenient than this. Search for the CCU mobile app on your device and download it for free. At CCU, bringing you better options matters. Find out more by visiting ccuflorida.org.